All right, we're recording.
Nice.
Welcome to this public-private conversation. Like I said, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that I've been meaning to ask for a while. And it's kind of interesting that I realized we've already talked quite a bit, and that's why I think these questions are even more interesting. What I realized was that I'm not entirely clear on your background before Liberating Structures, and I don't need every detail, but I always heard you mention that you did traditional kind of consulting. So how did that get started? I mean, were you trained as a classical organizational development consultant, or what was it?
I. My undergraduate program, is a good start to any interview. The second that people get asked about where things started, how far back do you go? And so their eyes, including mine, I'm sure they went up into my head and came back around the other side, a full circle of some sort. But I think the formative, important thing educationally, I needed to get out of conventional high school. So a group of students created a Let's Work in the Community and Get Credit for High School program, which we called it Why. Why are we here? Was the real question in this boring classroom. But we named it Wider Horizons for Youth, so we could sell it up to the principal, and we did. So a dozen of us got out of school, and then I was looking for a college that was also like that was practical, engaging in the community, all the things I care about. And so I went to found a school that did interdisciplinary studies, that kind of looked at everything from a holistic point of view. The faculty actually worked across disciplines. There were usually 4 faculty in different disciplines addressing a topic like health, individual and community. And so in that context, I became super interested, or maybe I was even before, is how do we plan for the future? How do we look ahead, but also be in the moment, like be here and look ahead. And so this was a great context in which I developed an interest in planning. And in college, I started community health planning work, doing research across different domains, business and health and labor, and just got interested in, like, how does anything even get shaped? How does the world get shaped out of this messy? Because I never got tracked into a discipline. I was always exploring them kind of together. But I wanted to know how to shape things, how the future gets shaped, so that the first. Your question was about what was some of the first kind of work that I did that helped with that or shaped things for me. So it was community health planning work. I was a community health planner. There was a U.S. federal initiative to kind of from the ground up, could communities decide how many hospitals they need and what kind, and what were the actual health needs, and then what kind of resources would we need to meet those health needs. So those were the really first efforts where I was getting interested in the future and what strategies and investments would help people. There are a bunch of other little things there, but eventually I ran a community health planning agency. I started a local community foundation here in Seattle, which was an education and research foundation. And we did research into obstetrical care? How could more mothers deliver without cesarean section? How could we address low back pain without over prescribing surgery that doesn't work? Things like that were super sort of research and education. Education was involved in learning how to think systemically or how to improve the situation we have. And so those were the first local kind of jobs where I was trying to, I'm still doing the same thing. You know, nothing has changed, except the scope is broader, perhaps. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And because I've always been trying to piece this together, how you went from this to Liberating Structures. And you sometimes mention this, but I was wondering were there any specific moments that took place in which you kind of noticed that the things you had learned didn't actually work, or you needed some kind of different approach?
Well, I'd worked in health sector for a number of years, and for whatever reason, I felt like I needed to validate my experience with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd say, you know, Mom, I'm working on health. And, you know, she's a pretty simple gal and I couldn't use any of the technical terminology or any of that stuff. And, you know, we're trying to make healthcare better, more accessible, you know, for everybody. And she said, well, it's not working. It's getting worse. It's getting significantly worse. So whatever you're doing, Keith, do something different or better. So of all the things that were out there that I was trying, and I had big budgets to invite anybody from any research domain. I mean, in big names, people, invite them into learning sessions, invite them into networked groups of executives that I was working with. And I could drop names, but I'm not going to, but they were the names of the day. 25 years ago, and then even for about 10 years there, I could invite anybody and learned a lot from them about what worked and what didn't work was the more interesting thing. So that question is always a good question. Like, what drove you to desperation of looking at liberating structures, which are these, you know, how did you get to a place where all of the expert-based, all of the refined, you know, you've got to spend your whole life working on this to get anywhere with it, which is pretty much the idea behind a lot of how people develop themselves in their work, to go like, no, I'm going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to go toward total simplicity, nearly expertless methodology. And that, my mom telling me it's not working was one of the things. And just seeing my own result. I mean, you can see, like, am I impressed with my own results? Like early on, like the C-section, the obstetrical care. We did all this work, had all these numbers, cool graphs, you know, I used the best analytics, hired people, and every hospital had some set of excuses. Every group of doctors, like, well, my patients are sicker. Or there was some immediate, like, that doesn't relate to what I'm doing. And so it's like, whoa, it turns out that a lot of analysis doesn't necessarily do anything. Even if it's systemic and it's all the factors and all that, I was like, okay, well, that's curious. Well, what does make a difference? What does change behavior? Is there anything that changes behavior? If analysis isn't it, what is it?
But I think that's a huge step, right? To admit that something actually isn't working, and then not to find excuses or to justify why in this case, of course, it's not working, but just to bluntly kind of go like, maybe we need a different approach. And is
Yep, yeah, it is
so
for everybody. Yeah.
and how did complexity theory play into this? Is this something you've always been into, or did you discover that along the way and then weave some of the theories into that, or how did that happen?
Well, interestingly, in your domain, one of the first people that, well, I've been introducing and learning about introducing methodologies, always been a methods person in all of these jobs I had and all the work I was doing, starting with quality improvement and benchmarking and idealized design and systems thinking and design thinking. You know, it just went on one after another. And partway in there, I think I'd had some of these experiences where the more conventional analytic approaches where we're trying to find causes and effects, you know, identify, like separate out, here's something, if you did more of this, you'd get more of that. And I had a number of like, no, it just wasn't, it didn't represent reality. And so I was reading around, seeing what other people were doing, and really the end of my rope on a whole variety of methodologies. And then some Buddhist kinds of ideas were out there already. Big fan of Joanna Macy. And then in the digital world, Kevin Kelly, he was at the time the executive editor for Wired magazine, of all things, wrote a book called Out of Control. And it was one of the first ones. This is when Meg Wheatley was publishing some of the early chaos theory stuff, not complexity so much, but chaos, how would that change things? But Kevin Kelly was one of the little parts of the Out of Control book. It was like, well, you want to recreate a meadow, like you love the beauty of a naturally formed meadow. And we know what all the plants are. We've studied all the plants. Then you can take all of those seeds, have a big open area, throw those seeds out, and that doesn't guarantee that anything like the idea that you had of the meadow, the sensitivity to the initial conditions in which these seeds are planted and the nonlinear pattern of growth and development. So he wrote about these ideas, complexity science ideas, in both human and biological terminology, where the blend of the two were like, well, are we talking about people, or are we talking about living things or the soil? And it was like one theory describing surprising developments. Like, oh, I'd never really seen anything like that. I had hints, and as I know you do too, you know, the world doesn't come prepackaged. It always surprises you. So what kind of theory, and so Kevin Kelly, some of the Buddhist literature were early signals. And then I found networks of people who were exploring it more deeply, professors, you know, intellectuals, the Santa Fe Institute. There were other resources that were kind of cooking along, but not very, I wasn't really into them, or just started to explore it. And it's like, oh boy, got my mind blown, you know, 10 times, 20 times, 100 times. So.
And speaking of getting your mind blown, is there anything lately that has blown your mind, something you've discovered that amazed you, or where you see a lot of potential? Any kind of new theory or field of science or something?
You know, I focused a lot of attention on the Liberating Structures community and what we're learning. So that blows my mind. More than any theory. I just finished this paper with Fisher about, which you very kindly commented on. So those ideas, maybe because I really dug into the literature for about 10 or 15 years, I haven't seen much that really changed those fundamentals of how life operates. But what I think we are doing in the Liberating Structures community is mind-blowing. We are literally inventing a new way to organize, a new way to think and act in organizations. And it's happening every day, little incremental sets of insights, but I'm convinced that it's the most mind-blowing thing imaginable. And you know, you're at the center of it. A whole bunch of people are at the center of it. But it is we're literally inventing a new way to organize, and that blows my mind. And I see it all the time. Little advances like, oh my, like just today, we were, and partly it's through introducing it to people who don't have the same experience with it. We're doing a critical uncertainties, mobility planning. How are we going to move around? And so if you know critical uncertainties and you know that everything is turned upside down as a result of COVID-19, all of a sudden, you're no longer holding on to a vision of a future somewhere out there. You actually can accept, and what's mind-blowing is everybody seemingly can hold different futures in their mind, different plausible futures, and still function intelligently, right? We don't have to have a single, even a goal for it, but we have to accept that the future unfolds in surprising ways. So what are we going to do about that? How are we going to organize around uncertainty, critical uncertainty in our future? And so I'm seeing people do that in an instant, just like boom, you know, okay, now I'm thinking I've just shifted what I think is possible. I'm more connected with other people. I think we can do something together, and we've just generated some really new ideas, new possibilities for what we're gonna do, or what we could do. And so that moment, which you described in the response to this paper, is like, oh yeah, that is the best. That's the moment that you love. That's the moment that I love, is that we have this capability together that's underutilized, we're figuring out how to bring it into everyday life, into organizational life, but everyday life. And so that blows my mind, that there's a community of people doing that all the time, focus their attention on that. Then I'd like to see more theoretical things, but I think that in this case, the practice is revealing more about theory, that it's working in practice in a way that we haven't yet figured out how to describe in theory. Mm-hmm. So that's a bizarre feeling that's why I felt like I needed to write that paper with Fisher, is like, well, what part of the theory is explaining or helping us understand? What gives us confidence that there's a theory behind what we're experiencing in our practice? What parts of the theory actually support us taking bigger risks with this work? Because that's the mind-blowing part. I say, and I'm imagining you do too, you say certain things to clients that are possible. It's like, did I just say that? Holy crap. Did I just say that we could invent a new way to organize and respond to COVID-19 and come out much better? You know, we can adapt creatively to even the most horrifying pandemic imaginable. So anyway, that's, I don't know, that's blowing my mind. And that, you know, also I'm not totally rose-colored glasses. I do see that every once in a while, even I need to put my head back in the sand and just like, I wish it would go away. You know, I wish, I don't want to change. I don't want to change. I do want to change. I do want to change, kind of a thing. But on balance, that's what the creative adaptability of people in a difficult moment like right now, that's what's blowing my mind. What about you for that? That's a great question. Like, what is it now?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, I can very much relate, but it's something that I always try to explain to people. There's such a surprising depth to liberating structures that people often don't realize, and maybe that's a good thing, because otherwise it would be too much or too much too soon. But just exactly what you described, it transformed the way that I collaborate with other people. And anytime I want to start an initiative or I do any kind of work, I can already see how that my approach is shaped by that, and all the principles behind it. Like again, in the people I work with now, whenever we do something new, it's always like, obviously we're going to do purpose to practice. And you know, it's like, oh, this thing, yeah, let's do social network webbing. And yeah, so that has completely changed the way that that I approach these things, and it's made it so much more effective. And what you just said about working with clients and telling them what is possible, that's, I mean, often I start to, because you get so wrapped up in these concepts, or like you're so much part of this whole culture that sometimes you underestimate how far out other people are. And then you start talking about, well, this is going to be possible, this is going to be possible, and then they're going to be like, well, we'll say that again. You can work productively with 20 people in one room. and you're like, oh, yeah, that's kind of the basics of, I was talking about this thing, but so those are often the moments when I realize how far this has already taken me, and the work that I'm doing, that it's just the concept of all these people involved is something that is mind-blowing to other people.
Scalable. You know, I don't, I've got, just did a thing with 300, another one's coming up 500. Those are kind of, they're harder to manage in some way, but it's the same. It's absolutely the same. My favorite bold thing to say is, yeah, we're gonna, to a client, you know, yeah, we're gonna solve that problem, or we'll address that problem like amazingly, and we will forever change the way you solve or work on any challenge. And then that's the end of the sentence. You know, we'll fix that thing and change the way you fix everything else forever. And then, you know, I just pause for a second, and they're probably going, ha ha ha, or crazy man, or whatever. But just the boldness of it that's what takes my breath away. The boldness of the depth of it, and the fact that it works as it is, and we're still inventing it. I think that's the brilliance of the thing is. And there's two, you know, pixies, how there's the little things on either shoulder. So one is Fisher and one is Henry. And Henry is just stick with the, you know, you just need 5 or 10 liberating structures and everything is great. And Fisher is like, there's an infinite number and they're all good and everything is an exploration. And so don't hold anything. There's no reason to hold anything constant. Just keep exploring. And then just get the basics and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And those two, they're both irresistible people, irresistible. But they're both whispering in my ear regularly.
Sweet. So, I mean, I know you're not a fan of the word vision, or any tightly held concept about the future, but is there any kind of tiny hope you have, or any ambition or aspiration for Liberating Structures that you see? Anything you would like to see in the future? Maybe a certain sector that is being transformed, or something that is being achieved, or a certain number that is being hit, or anything like that?
Recently, well, I'm interested in helping develop as many maestros as possible. So somebody who knows the repertoire and is capable of inventing new ones is a maestro. They know most of the existing repertoire and are inventing, not just adapting things, but inventing something that other people can use. So I'm interested in way more folks like that. And I think there's a few hundred now, maybe, or I don't know, some good number. But even 2 years ago, I would have said 10, maybe, or 12. So there's an exponential kind of growth in that, but there's never enough. Mm-hmm. And because each of those maestros brings along a whole bunch of other people, just in there, that they look. I know there's hundreds or thousands of people looking to you for things, for like, can I learn what he seems to be able to do effortlessly? I want to be able to do too, kind of a thing. So that's what a maestro is, I think. So I want more of those. That's not really a vision, but I think that's a limiting. I think the maestros are a way to get to liberating structures infused in everyday life, everywhere.
Right.
And so partly what I've been doing the last few years is like Agile, and the degree to which Agile seems to likes to bring liberating structures into Agile development in organizations. There's other movements like Agile that I'm trying to get to know enough about and help some maestros integrate, bring liberating structures into whatever that work is. And that's in schools and government and design and an endless number of things. So that kind of work, I guess, is what I think is important right now, is worthy, is purposeful. I'm also, it's mostly North America based just because of time zones and stuff, but I'm starting to put together something called regenerative strategy. Which is a effort to make some use of this pandemic, try to help. It could be, we're not just started a conversation, but what is it that you'd leave behind, and what is it that you'd bring back, and do that in the context of something like strategy not working, the approach. With similar kind of strategy not working approach, but with a healing, restorative, like regenerative medicine, where you use the body itself to heal. We need to do some healing even as we're doing more strategic thinking about the future. So I'd like to infuse more of the a liberated approach to strategy, either in one community across multiple domains in a community, or just pick one domain. Like, I thought about healthcare. It's pretty hard though. Healthcare is, well, there's more healing to be done, and it's and maybe because I know it best, it seems less, it resists change in a way that's pretty interesting, pretty hard to figure out. So I don't know yet, but those are my thoughts about the future, what's worth trying to do. And I also want to practice with, I've been introducing liberating structures. I need some time with other maestros. There's nothing like talking with you. There's nothing like working side by side with you. And just think about 6 or 7 of us all together, you know, doing some work, separate work, but together. So exciting. You know, could we advance the work by doing some collaborative work in a domain or in one community? Could we advance everything by going a little deeper is sort of the thing. Because now most of what we've been doing is wonderful things in separate locations, in separate domains.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's mostly what if that's a vision, it's things I want, things I want and think are important.
So on your way towards shaping liberating structures and bringing these into the world, do you have any favorite moments of failing? Any stories you remember fondly that in the moment made you break out in cold sweats or something like that, but in hindsight were really important on the way?
There were pretty big fears. I don't know if there's been an outright failure. I don't really think that way. When Henry and I, well, when we first were launching a big initiative in his old company in Latin America, he hired a bunch of people and knew a bunch of people, but in the Latin America region of his company, we were just launching a big initiative. We were outside of Sao Paulo in Brazil. All the leaders of the subsidiaries were there, and it was the day after they had to retract a product. $1 billion just disappeared from their portfolio in one day. It was a painkiller called Vioxx. I don't know if you remember it, but it was a big deal for them. And that next day we were launching this initiative when everybody felt like the rug had been pulled out. And not only it was a product and a financial loss, but the company was accused. This is a very proud company. It was accused of scientific malfeasance. A whole bunch of things were really, if not a slap in the face, more than a slap in the face. So I don't know if it's a failure, but it really seemed like we weren't even going to start. Like it's just like, did we still have any confidence? We didn't really have a repertoire. There wasn't something like now where over years people have used it and there's kind of a track record. We were trying some things, but we were pretty confident. But we did a basic conversation cafe with the group over the first hour over a 2-day launch of this big initiative. And it was like, okay, we're ready to go forward after 1 hour doing a conversation cafe. So, you know, that's not a failure, but that's one of the things when you have this incredible obstacle you think is going to stop you, you can always tap the creative adaptability of the group as long as you enter into it with real curiosity, with real desire to try to work through something. So I'm not sure. I think everything we do is failing forward.
Yeah.
I don't, and the different scales of it. But if that's the way you approach organizing, then there's only learning and no failure. You know, I think you know what I mean. So when people ask this question, what's the big failure I was like, nothing comes to mind. It just doesn't.
Right. No, I can totally relate, but so for example, I once spent 3 days with a large group and we did some things when I was just starting out. And I also had co-facilitator that I had to coordinate with, and then in the end, it kind of became obvious that we, and I'll just say this bluntly, but I felt like I just wasted people's time. And it was just like going in circles, and not even this good going circles where you still form relationships and things like that. It was just confusion, and then and and I learned. So that's one of my favorite moments of failing, because I learned so much from that, and I now know, for example, when there's a moment to have the group reflect on whether we actually make any progress and what do we need to make progress and things like that. But in that moment, it was just that just didn't work out. So
okay, there is a story now. I'm thinking of one that is pretty close to just plain failure. So there's a well-known business school, big deal, and Fisher and I were there. So it wasn't like my partner was a good partner. And we knew we were working on the purpose of this business school wanted to use the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They wanted to be the business school where we would work on sustainability on the planet. And so we're working on a purpose. And across the school, there's all these faculty, different disciplines, all students, alumni. We had everybody there. Good Noah's Ark of diversity, diverse opinions. And we knew that developing a purpose was going to be pretty tough. So we had like 3 or 4 backup, we did 9 whys, drawing together, all sorts of lots of things. And just we kind of scheduled about a half an hour on purpose, and then it was hour and an hour and a half, and 2 hours later we're still messing around. And nobody wanted to agree. It's an academic environment, so it's like the whole point of it is to disagree and beat on each other, until you come up with one winner at the end. And we knew that, but we still couldn't get a purpose. And whatever the political dynamics. So the reason, I guess that's a failure, but in that work, we found, and you might do this too, where some people totally got excited. They're going to use liberating structures the rest of their life. If the formal organization and the leadership didn't take it on, and all the faculty didn't embrace it. So as long as it changed the lives of some of the people involved and what they think is possible, we did not create a business school. We did not start a business school we may have made a little progress toward a business school, at least lightly pointing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals for the planet. But it's not at the center of their strategy. They're still educating kids to get big jobs, 7-figure jobs with banks, which is pretty much the opposite.
Right.
Well,
okay.
yeah.
So since we're still staying at home and I'm with my family and it's almost time for dinner, I have a bonus question for you.
Okay. Yeah. Good. I should. Yeah.
What's the best thing you cooked in the past months?
Well, I like to cook. So
yeah,
let's see. What's the best thing? That could be tricky. I learned some South Indian cuisine from a friend. We moved back to India. But there's something about the spicy tamarind. So it's a dish with a bunch of vegetables, but it uses a tamarind base to it. And so there's a certain depth of flavor you can get if you do the coconut, the cumin, the coriander, and you toast the spices in advance. You make it hot. There's also fresh chilies and other chilies. And so the dish is spicy, but and a little bit sour, but all of the coconut and there's also a curry leaf that you put in there that does a thing on top. But what's most interesting, I think, about Indian food is they do a lot of the spicing, the spicier things at the end. So you toast the coconut, you toast mustard seeds, there's a curry leaf, and all of those things kind of go in at the end of the cooking, and it's this total fragrant thing that's a great dish. So I like during this time, that's a pretty simple dish. Really, it sounds like it has a lot of different ingredients. It does. But that's the kind of thing, like the individual ingredients do something much more together. Create a whole bigger thing. So it's basically a vegetable sambar is the name of the dish. So what about you? What's for dinner tonight, Johannes?
Massaman curry.
Ah, nice. Nice. We're both we're in the same ancient cuisine there.
Yeah, I mean, what I really love is that since I'm home so much more, I also get to cook a lot more. And
yeah, isn't it great?
Advantage of that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I like grinding spices and all kinds of things. Yeah, the amount of time I spent traveling around and going places and preparing to go places that's all time that I have now to do other things. So great.
We will cook together one day.
I'd love it. Yeah. Well, I'd love to go back and teach do something at the Chaos Pilot someday. That was a treasured experience, you and me there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Well, thanks for the interview. Appreciate it very much. Really fun. And
thank you so much.
Yeah. Have a good dinner. Yeah.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.